Today I'm down in Southern California taking a look at what Honda is calling the most rugged Pilot ever. This is the new 4th generation 2023 Pilot in its most rugged trim, the new Trail Sport trim. Let's take a look, and if you want to know how it drives, stay tuned because hopefully over the next few months I'll be able to get my hands on one out on the road. For this generation Pilot, when Honda says all new, they mean all new. Everything is new, including a new 3.5-liter V6 and a new transmission as well. But probably the first thing you're to notice as you approach the Pilot is that this has returned a bit to its boxier roots. If you recall, the Pilot has been pretty boxy and pretty rugged looking in the past. That certainly applies for this new 4th generation model. We have full LED headlights up front with LED turn signals nicely integrated into those headlight modules. A more rugged interpretation of the Honda girl going on right there with a huge Honda logo that might just be the biggest Honda logo that they've ever put on a passenger vehicle. Down at the bottom of the bumper on this Trail Sport model, we have LED fog lights there, functional vents on either side, and then of course some more rugged sort of cheese grater going on down there at the bottom. No rugged model would be complete without its own rugged name. That's what Trail Sport is for in the Honda lineup. And we have orange accents on the outside, little Trail Sport badge right there. And Trail Sport badge is really all over the new Pilot. 2023 doesn't just bring us the most capable Pilot ever, it brings us the biggest Pilot ever. This is over 200 inches long if you're looking at the Trail Sport model. The regular versions are ever so slightly shorter because they don't have a factory hitch on the rear. Any way you slice it, it has grown considerably in this area of the vehicle. It has a wheelbase stretch of 2.7 inches versus the outgoing model. Almost all of that goes to rear passenger room. We don't know whether this will match or beat the class leaders at the moment, which would be the Palisade and the Telluride when it comes to combined legroom figures, but I suspect it's probably going to get pretty close. That's been a common complaint with the Pilot and the Highlander in the past, is that on the outside they were pretty decently sized, but on the inside they were a little tight when it came to legroom. We also have much more rugged styling going on with that really horizontal hood and certainly more of a rear-wheel drive proportion to the entire vehicle, especially this third window right back here, which is giving me perhaps a little bit of 4Runner meets Xterra vibes. Definitely an attractive look and certainly a rugged look, as Honda would like to remind you. As often happens at these kind of events, there are a lot of specifications I don't know on the new Pilot just yet. For instance, I don't know any interior headroom figures, and I don't know final ground clearance numbers. Although I do know that the Trail Sport model is going to get 1 inch extra ground clearance versus the rest of the Pilot lineup. We also get specific Trail Sport wheels. They're a little bit smaller. These are 18-inch wheels that gives you a bit more cushion on the tire. And the tire is definitely a departure from what we've seen from Honda in the past. These are all-terrain tires, the first time we've ever seen those on a Pilot. Also on offer for the Trail Sport model, standard skid plates front and rear. Those cover the engine, the transmission, and the gas tank in this vehicle, and they are designed for the full vehicle's weight to impact that skid plate. So if you're looking for perhaps the most rugged Honda ever built, it might be this, although some folks might tell you that would be the Ridgeline. Out back, we find a fairly vertical hatch and a new tail lamp design, definitely different than the previous Pilot. No more little C shapes going on with the tail lamps here. This mimics the sort of bar shapes that we found in the headlights, but these are not full LED modules. Interesting twist, the turn signals are still incandescents. Pilot is spelled out really large on this blacked out bar that joins one strip to the other, and then we don't have visible exhaust tips in the Trail Sport model. The other trims of Pilot have an exhaust finisher that is integrated into the lower portion of the bumper. We don't find that in this model, likely because this has a full-size spare tire, so things have been rearranged right there under the rear bumper cover just a bit. Toyota recently stirred up some controversy by replacing their long-standing V6 engine for a new 2.4-liter turbo in the Highlander. If you were worried that Honda would follow suit, fear not, because under this hood, we still have a naturally aspirated V6 engine. But it's an all-new 3.5-liter V6. It produces 285 horsepower, 262 pound-feet of torque. It still offers cylinder deactivation, and it's now mated to Honda's 10-speed automatic transmission. So if you weren't a fan of the controversial 9-speed, you might want to take a look at the Pilot again. All-wheel drive is going to be standard on the Trail Sport model, just as you'd assume, and of course the top-end Elite trim. The rest of the lineup is going to be front-wheel drive and likely going to give you the best fuel economy, although I don't have any fuel economy specifics just yet. One thing you won't find under this hood, however, is a hybrid system. We don't know whether that's going to be in the cards in the future, but you certainly won't find one for 2023. The all-wheel drive system in here continues to be one of Honda's most interesting IVTM systems. What's cool about this system is that it can send more power to the rear axle than we find in most of the competition. It does that by overdriving the rear axle. So even if there is no front wheel slip, this can send more power to the rear axle than pretty much all of the competition, except for the rear-wheel drive entries like a Dodge Durango or a Jeep Grand Cherokee. Up to 70% of engine power can be sent to the rear axle, with no front wheel slip, and then 100% of that can be sent to a single rear wheel. That's thanks to a rear axle that gives us torque vectoring capability, limited slip functionality, and of course a locking function as well. Certainly going to be handy in something like this Trail Sport trim. What does that mean for off-road capability? Well, honestly, it's a little too early to tell at this point, but all the indications are that this will be a significant improvement over the outgoing model. It certainly has a more rugged body structure, more protection underneath, the extra ground clearance, and the more capable tires. Now, it does not have things like a 2-speed transfer case or a true locking rear differential like you do find in some of the competition, but you can bet that this is going to be a lot less expensive than something like a Grand Cherokee Trailhawk. Obviously, I haven't been able to spend a lot of time inside the new Pilot, but the front seats do appear to be pretty comfortable. There's a 2-position memory over there on the driver's door, 2-way adjustable lumbar support. I do wish we had a 4-way lumbar support in this model. And we have a tilt-telescopic steering column with a pretty decent range of motion. Now, the passenger seat does not have the same range of motion as the driver's seat. One of the reasons the Pilot has proved so popular over its last 3 generations is that it's very roomy on the inside, and that continues for this generation. The upright and boxy format gives us plenty of headroom. I have about 2 inches of headroom here in the second row, even though this model has this large panoramic moonroof. Now, when it comes to seating, the Pilot has kind of an unusual setup in that the top-end trims come in 8-passenger versions, and this off-road trim is 7-passenger only. Interestingly, this is one of the few models that's going to have a dedicated captain's chair right here in the second row. Most of the Pilots you'll find on the dealer lots are going to be 8-passenger Pilots, with the top 2 trims having a removable seat right here in the middle of the second row, and then the EXL trim lets you choose between an 8-passenger version and a 7-passenger version. The other models that are 8-passenger just have a bench seat right across the middle. I suspect that the reason we don't have the middle seat in this model is the added weight of the skid plates underneath the vehicle. They probably had to delete that particular seat. Also, there's nowhere for the seat to go in the back because, as I'll show you in a bit, the cargo area does get a tiny bit smaller if you get the Trail Sport version. We still have a very capable second row seat, but kind of surprisingly, you cannot tilt and slide these seats forward with the child seat latch anchored into position because of the way the seat back moves. You can, however, slide the seat forward, and it does appear that we get a lot more room behind the seat if you do that than we found in the previous version. That means that if you do want to leave a child seat in that position, you can probably get in and out right here. Speaking of the third row, let's go ahead and give that a whirl. If I pull this seat back, it latches into a position that gives me a little bit of extra legroom, but if I release that and pull it all the way back, then we have a little bit less. My knees are touching that seat back. However, in this position, I have a lot of legroom up front and a lot of legroom in the second row. So this is the kind of vehicle where you could very easily put 6-foot-tall people with relative comfort. Now, when it comes to that relative comfort, back here in the third row, my head is touching the ceiling. Specifically, it is touching this center shoulder belt that does come out of the ceiling. That module hangs down a little bit on the passenger side back here. We get a little bit more headroom over there on the driver's side. This does have a 3-position third row, but it is a little tight in the back. However, it does seat 8, and that's not something we find in all the competition, especially in the top-end trims. I also appreciate the fact that Honda has done a decent job carving out legroom back here in the third row. You can see there's a little indent right there for that middle seat position to get a little bit of extra room. And then the floor mats do come around right like that to give a little bit of extra coverage right around that area where the second row seat tracks are. Continuing the theme of biggest ever, we find 22.4 cubic feet of cargo capacity behind the third row in the Pilot, a significant improvement over the current model, enough to bring this up to class leading, depending on exactly how you want to measure that. There is a little bit of confusion, but it really doesn't matter. This is one of the largest cargo areas available in a 3-row crossover period. Certainly more than we find in the Atlas and the Telluride, which have 2 of the largest cargo areas in the back. There is some confusion based on measurement standards as to whether this or the Traverse is bigger. Either way, big cargo area, it really doesn't matter. Under this load floor, we find a little bit of additional storage space in the Trail Sport model, and even more storage area under there if you get the other versions of the Pilot. If you want to know how much storage area is down there, be sure and check out the other video on the Pilot where I focus more on the Elite trim. If you're a fan of power third row seats, well, too bad, you'll need to shop elsewhere. However, I'm not the biggest fan of power third rows because you simply can't move them as quickly as you can a manual third row like this. We also get a little bit more room because clearly that power mechanism has to go somewhere, and that almost always takes up cargo space in the rear. So I think this is a decent trade-off. Going for a quick spin around the interior, we have a large panoramic moonroof in this model. It extends to just above the rear passenger's laps. This has a powered shade, and we have manual shades for the rear passengers. Lots of orange accents, just as you'd expect in a Trail Sport trim. Also, big embroidered Trail Sport logo right there with height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger. One thing that surprised me is that the TrailSport trim does not have ventilated front seats. Moving down there to the footwells, you can see TrailSport logos on those standard rubber all-weather mats. That's a really cool touch. Lots of storage going on the front doors, bottle holders, cup holders, storage bins, things like that. We also find lots of soft touch materials on the doors themselves, but we do also have a reasonable amount of piano black plastic, which is really going to show that dust out on the trail. Moving over to the bulk of the dashboard, we have a large storage bin right here in the dash. I was a little bit confused by that in some initial photos. If you are too, this is actually a large storage well. You can easily put some large smartphones in there. It's not just a trim panel. Down below that, we have a stitch section of the dashboard, more orange accents, and a large bin-style glove compartment. Moving on up to the infotainment system, this is the optional 9-inch system. There's also a 7-inch system available in the Pilot. This is definitely a little smaller than some of the more recent entries in this segment, which do have large 12-inch displays. Maybe Honda is saving that up for some sort of mid-cycle refresh or some different trim, but the screen does come across as just a tiny bit small for a vehicle that is new for 2023. Below that, we have the engine start-stop button, the controls for the dual-zone automatic climate control up front, and then a third zone back there for the rear. Below that, we have USB inputs for CarPlay and Android Auto. If you want to use a wired connection, USB-C for just charge only. There's a small little storage pocket there. I guess you can keep your Motorola flip phone in there. But then we do have a very large Qi wireless charging mat for those larger smartphones, and really almost even enough area there for some of the small tablets that are available. We have the Hunt and Peck style shifter that we find in other Hondas. Drive mode selector right there. Hill descent control. Button to turn off the auto start-stop system, brake hold, electric parking brake, and then a pretty wide center console. Plenty of storage going on there. Over on the driver's side, we find a partial LCD instrument cluster, which surprised me a bit as well. Over here, we have an approximately 7-inch LCD, and then the speedometer is a physical analog gauge. I had expected to see a full LCD right over here because we do find that in some of the competition for likely similar prices. Moving out from there, we find the infotainment controls over here on the left side of the steering wheel, paddle shifters on the back, and the button for the heated steering wheel is down there on the bottom. If you want to get your hands on the new Pilot, you don't have too long to wait. These will be on sale late 2022. So now is the time to head down to your Honda dealer and start getting on a waiting list, because there probably will be a wait list, at least at the start, for the new Pilot. And if you're on the fence as to whether to get a Pilot now or wait to get the new Pilot, personally, I would wait to get the new Pilot. Now, one thing we don't know is pricing, but if we take a look at the Ouija board, we can kind of guess as to where pricing will go. For 2022, the Pilot started at $38,080, the TrailSport started at $44,810, and the Elite trim came in at $50,370. You can bet that this is going to stick relatively close to that formula, although there's likely going to be a price increase, just as we've seen across the board. Exactly how much of a price increase we don't know just yet, but I will say that Honda already has one of the higher starting prices in this segment. Is that deserved for the new Pilot? Well, we'll have to wait and see, because I haven't been able to drive one just yet, but stay tuned, because hopefully I will be doing that just as soon as possible. If I were to continue with my unfounded prognostication, I would say that this Pilot is probably not just going to be the most capable and most off-road oriented and most dynamic Pilot ever built. It's probably going to be among the best in those categories in its entire segment. Now, there are going to be entries that are going to feature 2-speed transfer cases, true locking rear differentials, things like that, but they're going to be a lot more expensive than the Pilot. If you want that kind of feature functionality on your 3-row Grand Cherokee, be prepared to pay considerably more than $50,000 for the right to get those features. When it comes to on-road driving dynamics, the Pilot has always done really well, and I find that some shoppers are surprised by that, but the Pilot has always had a dedication to handling ability on-road and off-road thanks to the all-wheel drive system that Honda uses. The torque vectoring functionality in the rear is quite unique. There are other entries that use multi-plate clutch arrangements in their rear diff units, but they don't do the same sort of thing overdriving the rear axle like we find in the Honda Pilot. The result is that this is an awful lot of fun when you get out on a winding mountain road. Or at least I'm going to go ahead and guess that this is a lot of fun, because the previous generation Pilot was, and Honda tends to fine-tune and refine things over time. And that's exactly what I expect out of this Pilot. Now, one thing that I had expected out of this Pilot that we don't find are bigger screens on the inside. If you want 12.3-inch infotainment screens, 12.3-inch instrument clusters, lots of screens everywhere, passenger screens, rear passenger screens, you're going to find those in the competition. You won't find them at any price in the 2023 Pilot. And I'm a little bit sad about that, because the instrument cluster and infotainment screen especially feel a little on the small side for a 2023 model, especially when Toyota just released the new Highlander with a big 12.3-inch infotainment screen, and of course its full LCD instrument cluster in that model as well. Of course, we have the Palisade and the Telluride, which also have twin 12.3-inch screens on the inside. And if you want screen overload, you can pay $20,000 more get a Grand Cherokee, and it will have about 70 inches of LCD on the inside. Pretty much every LCD you can imagine is going to be found on that Jeep model, but you're going to be paying Pilot plus Civic prices for that ability. Now, if you want to know how the Pilot drives, hit that subscribe button and stay tuned, because hopefully I will be driving one just as soon as possible. In the meantime, again, head down to your Honda dealer if you want to put one of these on your shopping list. And I suspect I would be really interested in this Trail Sport trim and the top-end Elite trim. The Elite trim you're going to find me covering in a separate video, but a little bit of a hint here. I really like that model because it is one of the very, very few top-end models that will still seat 8. Outside of a Pilot Elite, which has 8 seats standard, you're really taking a look at full-size SUVs like a Tahoe or a Suburban, and they're going to be a lot more expensive. Hit that subscribe button, find me over at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and check out the related videos. Of course, again, stay tuned, and I will see all of you next week.